Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Wassalatu wassalamu ala Sayyidina Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala. Welcome everyone back to our discussion and reading of the great book of the Qadi Abi Shuja' radiallahu anhu in explaining to us the basic concepts of Shafi'i fiqh. Inshallah, in today's class, we will continue talking about the congregational prayer by discussing situations of a congregational prayer that takes place inside a mosque and a congregational prayer that takes place partly in the mosque or outside of the mosque or all outside of the mosque. In other words, in which there's large distances between the leader of the prayer, the imam, and those that are praying behind him in ma'mun. So we will learn some of the fiqh because there is actual fiqh about that is important for us to keep in mind. And now, mashallah, because of the population growth of Muslims in the Islamic year 1444, in the Ramadan of 1444, we've actually surpassed 2 billion Muslims numerically. So these type of fiqh issues are only going to be more common in the future when the congregational prayers become too large, not just for Jummah and Eid, but other types of prayers. So this is an important discussion to learn. And then after that, we will move in. So that will complete the section of the congregational prayer, which we started in the last class. We will complete here. And then, inshallah, we will move in to shortening the prayers. Usually shortening and combining the prayers are together, but they're actually two separate fiqh discussions, which is one of the reasons why we teach, so we can highlight that to people. So we will talk in this class, inshallah, about the shortening the prayer. And we'll finish that section. Of course, the shortening the prayer is usually the function of travel, but in the Shafi'i madhab, it's not just a function of travel. So we will come to learn about that. And we will also learn the fiqh of what defines your home versus what defines a traveling state. What is the difference between the state of the muqim, the state of the resident, and the state of the musafir? Because those are states, and those states can be combined in the same person. You start traveling and then you stop traveling, etc. So we are going to look at the nuance of those definitions and understand how do we apply our prayer. This will also extend, by the way, to fasting. So even though we're not discussing fasting yet, that will come in another module. When we get there and we talk about the person that breaks the fast for the prayer, for traveling rather, we will remember this discussion where we lay down the groundworks of the definition of the muqim, the resident, and the definition of the traveler, which is very, very important to know for a fiqh student. So let us begin the way we usually begin, which is turning to the Arabic text that we will read, inshallah. So Imam or Qadi Abi Shuja' radiallahu anhu says, I'm going to pick up where we left off. So he says, قال رضي الله عنه ونفعنا بعلومه في الدارين آمين. وأي موضع صلى في المسجد بصلاة الإمام فيه وهو عالم بصلاته أجزأه ما لم يتقدم عليه. وإن صلى في المسجد والمأموم خارج المسجد قريبا منه وهو عالم بصلاته ولا حائلا هناك جاز. وحد القرب بينهما 300 ذراع تقريبا. فصل في قصر الصلاة وجمعها. ويجوز للمسافر قصر الصلاة الرباعية ب5 شرائط: أن يكون سفره في غير معصية، وأن تكون مسافته 16 فرسخا، وأن يكون مؤديا للصلاة الرباعية، وأن ينوي القصر مع الإحرام، وأن لا يأتم بمقيم. ويجوز للمسافر أن يجمع بين الظهر والعصر في وقت أيهما شاء، وبين المغرب والعشاء في وقت أيهما شاء. ويجوز للحاضر في المطر أن يجمع بينهما في وقت الأولى منهما. Okay, that's actually a little bit more than what we're going to read. Let's look at the English and then go to the dalil. So in the concluding part of the traveler section, he says, rahimahullah, if the imam prays inside a mosque and the followers pray behind him close outside, it is permissible provided that the follower is aware of the imam's prayer and there is no barrier between them. Okay, now the section on travelers shortening the prayer. Travelers are entitled to shorten prayers consisting of 4 rak'ahs to 2 rak'ahs provided that 5 conditions are met. The number 1 is that the journey itself does not entail disobedience. Number 2, that the distance of the journey be at least 16 farsakh. Number 3, that the prayer being performed normally consists of 4 rak'ahs. Number 4, the intention to shorten the prayer is concurrent with the opening Allahu Akbar. And number 5, the one shortening the prayer does not follow a resident or a traveler who is not shortening in prayer. So before we jump into that fiqh, let us look at some of the adillah for the sections that we will cover. Okay. In respects to the traveling situation, the main dalil is, or one of the main dalils is verse 101 in Surah An-Nisa, وَإِذَا ضَرَبْتُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ فَلَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ أَن تَقْصُرُوا مِنَ الصَّلَاةِ. So when you set out to when you set out to travel, there is nothing preventing you from shortening your prayer. Also, we have the hadith that one of the companions asked about the verse فَلَيْسَ عَلَيْكُمْ جُنَاحٌ أَن تَقْصُرُوا مِنَ الصَّلَاةِ إِنْ خِفْتُمْ أَن يَفْتِنَكُمُ الَّذِينَ كَفَرُوا, because the verse continues and it almost makes it as a condition if you are fearful that the disbelievers will harm you. So they asked the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ said that this is a sadaqah, that this is a gift that's given to the believers, so accept it. In other words, so there is no condition that you are in harm's way, or if you are traveling, that is the permissibility to shorten the prayer, as we will come to discuss. And then as far as the distance, this comes from the hadith that's narrated in Bukhari, that Ibn Umar and Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma used to shorten their prayer and break their fast in a certain area, Arba'a Bard, which is 16 farsakh away from Medina, which is where the distance comes from, and I'll translate that into kilometers inshallah when we get to that section. Okay, those are the main adillah that we will talk about, inshallah. Let us go back and then let us look at the fiqh, starting with the congregational prayer inside the mosque. So the first thing that we want to be aware of is, he says, if the imam going back a sentence prior, whoever prays in a mosque behind the imam while aware of the imam's prayer, the prayer suffices. Okay, so inside the mosque, meaning inside a pure mosque, al-masjidul khalis, meaning that this structure has been purely made from a waqf point of view for the purposes of the 5 daily prayers and Salatul Jum'ah. Salatul Jum'ah not necessarily a condition, because sometimes there are those small mosques close and everyone gathers at the larger mosque, but let's just go with it for right now, that the mosque is khalis, it's a pure mosque made only for the prayer. How do you know what a pure mosque is versus what we can call mixed use mosque? It comes back to the waqf document. Some of the ancient places of prayer in the Muslim world are actually schools, not masajid. We maybe commonly refer to them as mosques, like the famous Azhar mosque, but the Azhar mosque is not a mosque. From the waqf point of view, it's a school. So the fiqh regarding what happens inside that place is going to be different than if it's purely a mosque. From the point of view of women who have their monthly cycle attending, from the point of view of you have janaba passing through the mosque, from the, so on, all of the ahkam that we have with the mosque, including buying and selling and things like that of the property. But here, when he talks about mosque, he says a place that is made for the mosque, even if it is large and there are substructures inside. That's also important to understand. So there might be rooms inside of the mosques, walls and doors and things like that. But as long as the mosque is a mosque that's purely made from the waqf point of view, for the point of view of prayer, wherever one prays inside this mosque, behind the imam, but being aware of the imam's prayer, your prayer is valid. So you either can see the imam from far away, or you hear the imam from far away, or you hear the muballigh, or you hear, in the modern situation, the microphone or the speaker system. As long as you are being aware of the movements of the imam and you are in the same structure as the imam, then your prayer is going to be valid. There's nothing wrong with that. Even if the distance between you and the imam is far. That's the key. That's why it's in this section. So we, for example, used to study in the Azhar, in the mosque in the seminary, and the mihrab for the prayer was way, way, way in front, and our jalsa, our schoolhouse, was in the back at the entrance of the mosque. But when the adhan came, we would just stand and pray where we were. Why? Because we are in the same space, able to follow the imam, and the distance between us and him, as we will come to learn, even if we look at it that it wasn't a mosque, did not breach the distance between the gaps, which we will come to see in the next section. In the mosque, there is no problem with the gap section, because it's in one space dedicated to the prayer, as long as you are aware of the movements of the imam. You can be aware either through just natural hearing or through intervention like the muballigh or speaker system. So I can't think of a mosque example right now, but some of these huge colossal masjid structures in the Muslim world, when you walk into the mosque and you find the prayer going, you don't necessarily have to run all the way to the front to join the rows. As long as you're inside the mosque, you step inside the mosque, khalas, you can pray as part of that jama'ah. So this is an important point of view of fiqh, because when the prayer starts, of course, you as a man, you want to go and join the lines. I'm not advocating that we break the lines, but it's important to understand that they can be far away from the few lines that are behind the imam, and all of that is permissible, and that kind of facilitates the different activities that will happen in a mosque, because usually you'll have circles of Quran or Hadith or Fiqh or whatever in the mosque, or Arabic language, and in that case it's easier not to break up those circles like we did when we studied. You just stand, you pray, and then you sit, and then you continue your lesson, inshallah. So again, as long as you are in a mosque dedicated for the purpose of prayer, and you are aware of the movements of the imam, your prayer with him is valid. And he adds one more condition: provided that one does not advance closer to the direction of the prayer than his imam. In other words, that you are not in front of the imam. So in the Shafi'i madhab, for us, it is a condition of the congregational prayer that the imam be the first person in the front. You can, as a man, be next to the imam, equal to him. That is still valid, but it's disliked. The preferable thing is that the imam is just a few, inches ahead of everybody, if possible, because this is the sunnah of the prayer, is that the imam is the leader of the prayer. As we mentioned in the hadith, I think in the last class, the Prophet ﷺ said, "Ju'ila al-imam liyutamma bihi," or kama qala ﷺ, that the imam has been established so that we can follow him. So this for us is a condition, and this is obviously a difference of opinion, I think, from the Maliki schools, where it's not a condition, but for us it is. So again, as long as you are not in front of the imam, yaqinan, based on certainty. But if you are doubtful, is this part of the mosque in front of the imam or not in the imam? that doubt doesn't count because al-yaqinu la yazulu bil-shak, that certainty is not violated with doubt. And the default in the prayer is that you are praying behind the imam. That's where the certainty is in that equation. So that type of doubt doesn't count. And then he goes on and he says, if the imam prays inside the mosque and the followers pray behind him close, outside, it is permissible provided that the follower is aware of the imam's prayer and there is no barrier between them. So, meaning that there is an overflow from the mosque that spills outside of the mosque. If the lines are contiguous all the way, line after line after line after, it doesn't matter how far back it goes, it's one prayer, there's no problem with that. Here he is talking about what happens if the mosque is full from the imam in the mihrab all the way to the door of the mosque, and then there's a gap, and then there are other people praying behind him. The first point of fiqh is that gap can be no wider than 144 meters. That's what we read about the whatever farsakh in the text, in the original text. That's the equivalent in meters, is 144 meters. So the first point of view of fiqh is that the gap between me and the last row, which is contiguous with the imam, is 144 meters. Not that the distance between me and the imam, because the imam might have 5-6 rows behind him. So between me and that last row is 144 meters. And also the second point of fiqh in this scenario is that you have to be aware of the imam's movements. So there's got to be a sound system or muballigh, or you see the imam moving, or you hear him faintly, or there's something, but you have to also be aware of the prayer to be considered part of the congregational prayer. And then number 3 is that there be no barrier between them. So there can be no walls or closed doors in that 144 meter space, but it's unobstructed space. So this is important, as I said, for large prayer gatherings, and this would also, this would also apply if we were all outside, not just inside the mosque. So sometimes when you pray out in nature, there are just constraints with the land, and sometimes you have to have gaps. So keeping in mind that 144 meters is that permissible gap, that's an important part of the fiqh, so you understand what it is that you're doing. I want to see if there's anything I wanted to pick up from the Hashiyah. No. Okay. So next we move in to the section of the traveler. So before we get into the fiqh, let's understand what traveling is in the Sharia. The first thing about traveling is that there is a short travel and a large travel. The short travel is going to be the 16 farsakh I got mixed up in my head is the distance of travel, because that's the section that we are going to talk about next. The distance of the prayer, as mentioned in the text itself, that is not listed in the matn itself. I apologize. That's something I misspoke. Okay, that distance comes from the Hashiyah, which is, let's see, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Uh, 300 dhira. 300 dhira is the distance. And as I said before, I'm just, because of the level of this fiqh class, I'm going to dispense with showing you the conversion, and I'm just going to, 300 dhira is 144 meters. So I apologize for that. Okay, so getting back to traveling. The traveling state, as I said, can be short or long. So I can go, quote unquote, traveling for the day, but that would be a travel that we use urfan, in the common language. But what is the travel in the Sharia defined as vis-a-vis it impacts the shortening the prayers, combining the prayers, breaking your fast, etc.? It is that the minimum distance is 81 kilometers. So if from where I am to where I'm going is 81 kilometers or more, then it is a Sharia travel, a Sharia distance. Now, as I said in the introductory clip, there is traveling as a state. So when you come to travel, what determines that you have entered into the state of travel? So if I'm leaving my house and I'm going, something that's several hundred kilometers away, so it's the distance of travel. Does that mean that the minute I pack my bag at home, I'm a traveler? No. The state of travel starts when you leave your hometown. Either you leave, there's a border, or there's a fence, or there's a change of road, or from a local road to a high road or a highway or freeway, or there is a marker that now you are leaving the city of, or something like that. Or everyone knows that this row of houses or this area is the end of the city limits. Whatever that means in your hometown, once you step over that, then you begin that you are in the state of traveling. So just because you're leaving your house to travel, it does not mean that you have entered into the state of traveling. So people that travel overseas, for example, you have to see where the airport is. Maybe the airport might be in your home area, so you might leave your house and go to the airport, but you are still not, from the Sharia point of view, considered a traveler, or you might be a traveler. So it depends. Why is that important? Because one of the principles that we will learn is that whenever the state of traveling and the state of residency are mixed, the state of residency overcomes. إذا اختلط السفر والحضر غلب الحضر. So, when I'm at home, I'm at home. That's my default. I'm about to travel and I pack my bags and I get in the car and I go. But now both are together. That means you default to that you are a resident. The minute I step over that border, then I enter into the state of traveling, and then all of the fiqh that we were going to talk about can take place. So that's a very important thing. The other thing that we will come to learn about is that there is a difference between, or another condition is that the travel itself has to be valid. In other words, I am not traveling for the purpose of something haram, which is called al-ma'siyah bil-safar, with a ba'. That means that the whole travel is haram. I'm going on a trip, I'm going to Las Vegas to gamble. That's the whole purpose of my trip. Well, that's haram. The whole trip is haram, which is very different than I'm going to Las Vegas to attend a conference and I'm going to gamble while I am traveling. That's al-ma'siyah fil safar, which I'll talk about shortly in the next clip. So we have two differences of sinning and traveling. The travel itself is a sin versus I commit a sin while I'm traveling. We all sin. Kul ibn Adam khata. We all commit sins. So one of the things that the rules of the shortening and the joining and breaking your fast in prayer and traveling is predicated on the travel not being haram itself, which is different than going for a legitimate travel and committing a sin in the travel. If the travel itself is haram, it's called al-ma'siyah bil-safar, that the whole reason you're traveling is for the haram purposes, in which case none of these rules are going to be valid. Al-ma'siyah fil-safar, while you travel, is a different, because we all human and we all commit sins. Okay, so let us go through the list and then pick up some of the scenarios and apply some of the things that I've just mentioned, so we understand. So travelers are entitled to shorten prayers consisting of 4 rak'ahs, provided 5 conditions are met. Okay, so the first thing is obviously there are only 3 prayers that you can shorten: Dhuhr, Asr, and Isha. You can't shorten Fajr and you can't shorten Maghrib. So when it comes to Qasr, the shortening of the prayers, this is only a function of travel. There is no other dispensation that would allow you to do that. And even in that dispensation, we are only allowed to shorten a 4 rak'ah prayer to a 2 rak'ah prayer. Number 1 is that the journey itself does not entail disobedience. Al-ma'siyah bil safar, with the ba, bil, meaning the whole travel is for the purposes of something haram. As long as it's not that, then you have the first condition check, which is again different, that somebody sets out to travel and they commit, unfortunately sins and mistakes while they travel. They ask Allah for forgiveness, inshallah, Allah will forgive, but that doesn't violate that it's a travel. So what are the reasons that one can travel? One can travel if they are visiting relatives, if they are for work purposes, if for school purposes, if they're traveling on a trip with their family, they're going to perform Umrah or Hajj, or they're going to attend a conference, or visit an alim. All of those are all hosts of reasons that you can travel. The only other dispensation, the only other type of travel that does not allow us to shorten our prayer is traveling for the sake of traveling, which would be, the correct English word would be vagabonding. It's just going out and about just for the sake of travel with no destination, with no itinerary, etc. If you're doing that, it's not haram, but you do not fall into the situation in which you have the right to shorten and combine your prayers. Number 2 is that the distance be at least 16 farsakh, which is 81 kilometers, or for those that know the other system, 50 miles. Meaning from where you're going to where the destination is. Now, an interesting thing about this is sometimes when you study older books of fiqh, like I remember I was reading this in the Hashiyah of Imam al-Bajuri once, and I can't remember exactly where it is right now, but he says that these 2 cities between Cairo and one of the cities in the Delta, for example, is not the distance of Qasr. And I remember I was like, but whenever we go to that city, we pray Qasr. So I remember I asked one of my teachers, and he said, this is because the book was written before modern pavement and before the new roads were built. At the time when Imam al-Bajuri wrote that, they just would take the path along the Nile River. In that case, it was not the distance of travel. But now it is, certainly, because you have to take the roads and things like that. So that taught me something. That was a very important learning lesson for me, which is you have to see the distances now of where you're going. And sometimes, believe it or not, those distances can change. Either they can be longer or they can be shorter. But the next condition is that it has to be at least 81 kilometers. And number 3, the prayer being performed normally consists of 4 rak'ahs. Or another way of stating that, it can only be Salatul Dhuhr, Asr, and Isha. And then number 4 is the intention to shorten is concurrent with the opening Allahu Akbar. So remember when we talked about the arkan of the prayer, we learned that the first thing is that we have to have an intention in our heart as we are saying Allahu Akbar, that this prayer that we are going to pray is Dhuhr or Asr or whatever the case may be. We also learned that the arkan of the prayers are the different rak'ats. You have to follow the Fajr is 2, Dhuhr and Asr are 4 each, Maghrib is 3, Isha is 4. 2, 4, 4, 3, 4. That's embedded with the niyyah. So if I want to shorten my prayer, given all of the other valid conditions are met, when I'm saying Allahu Akbar, I have to have the intention that I'm shortening the prayer. If I don't, then the default is that the prayer will be mutammim. You have to pray it all 4 rak'ahs. So that's important. And because you usually are not traveling, this actually, I make this mistake all the time because I forget that I'm traveling. So it's something to be aware of. And then lastly, he says, the one shortening the prayer does not follow a resident or a traveler who is not shortening the prayer. So if we are praying in jama'ah and I am shortening my prayer, I should be the imam. And when you shorten your prayer and you are leading the prayer, when you get to the second rak'ah, that's the end for you, and you finish the tahiyyat and everything, you are going to say, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah, atimmu salatakum fa inni musafir. So you don't do the second taslim, you do the first taslim, and then you say, continue your prayers because I am traveling. And you can even say it in another language if it's another dominant language, or you can say it in Arabic for the sunnah and then the other language, both are fine. But the idea is that that's a reminder, even though you probably told people before you led the prayer that you're going to be praying a shorter version. You just remind the people, anyone who has come late, to stand. So, what I can't do is I can't do it reverse. I can't walk into a mosque while I'm traveling and I'm going to city A and I've arrived, and I walk into a mosque to pray Salatul Asr, and of course they're praying the normal 4 rak'ahs, and after rak'ah 2 I just sit there on the ground while they finish. That I can't do. In that case I have to pray the 4 rak'ahs. Or maybe my traveling companion does not want to shorten his prayer. He decided for whatever reason, which is completely his right because this is just a rukhsa, that he doesn't want to shorten his prayer. And we're praying together and he prays 4 rak'ahs, then therefore I have to complete the 4 rak'ahs after him. So if you're praying by yourself, then that's not an issue. You're going to pray the 2 rak'ahs. And then in next class we'll talk about the combining, because there's not enough space in this class to talk about them both. But usually they're both happening together. But if I'm by myself, I just pray the 2 rak'ahs and that's okay. But if I'm going to pray in congregation, you have to find out who's traveling and who's not. And when you do travel and there's a Muslim, or there's a prayer hall or a prayer room or a meditation room in which Muslims gather, Muslims are gathering to pray, it is very common that people will ask who's shortening their prayer. It's a very common thing. Oh, I'm shortening. Okay, it's faddal akhi, you lead the prayer because you're shortening. Because sometimes people that work at the airport are also Muslim, they pray with you, so they're a muqim, they're a resident. Or you are a traveler, but the airport is not outside of your city, so therefore you have to pray the muqim number of rak'ats because you haven't entered into the state of travel, which is why those definitions are important. That's another situation. Okay, the other thing I want to say before we close out this discussion, which I should have said in the beginning, but let me say it now, is the reverse, is that when I come back home, we said that when you leave your city limits, that you become a traveler. When does your travel end? When you hit the city limits of the place that you're going. We will talk about the duration of travel in the next class, but that's when the travel, that journey ends. And then the reverse happens. You begin your travel there when you leave the city limits of the place that you're in. City limits, loosely defined, as I mentioned, there could be many ways of defining it. And it ends the minute you enter the border of your town, your city. Once you enter into that, even if you still, tired, jet lag, you haven't unpacked, your state has now entered into the state of residency. Because whenever those two states are together, the state of residency will always overtake. So I know it sounds like it's nitpicking, but it's very important because these definitions have real impact on how you're going to say your prayers, how you're going to shorten or not shorten, combine or not combine, break your fast or fast, so on and so forth. And then we will also learn in the next class how this impacts making up prayers. But let me just give you a quick foreshadow, which is that if you miss a prayer while you are traveling and you make it up when you come back home, you have to make it up full. But if you make up that prayer while you're traveling, you can make it up shortened, and we'll pick that up in the next class to make these points clear. Inshallah, wallahu ta'ala a'la wa a'lam wa sallallahu ala sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Alhamdulillah, in this class we were able to finish our discussion of the congregational prayer. So we talked about a couple of scenarios that are very important for us to remember. Is that one, what are the rules for the congregational, the jama'ah prayer inside a masjid? So that took us to talk a little bit about what the definition of a mosque is and what it's not, and how sometimes the mosques can be very big, not necessarily very small. Of course, if the mosque is small, then all of this fiqh becomes easy, but it really becomes an issue when we're thinking about large prayer spaces. So we learned that as long as you are aware of what the Imam is doing, and being aware could be either that you see or hear him, or hear or see a type of muballigh, whether it be another person or a modern sound system. And then we also said that the other condition is that you do not pray in front of the Imam. So I know many of us, alhamdulillah, have gone to Medina, for example, and if we haven't, we ask Allah Ta'ala to take us there. You will find outside the haram, there's usually some kind of sign or some kind of line, do not pray in front of this line because then you're in front of the Imam. So when there's huge gatherings of people, sometimes you're disoriented, you have no idea where is the Imam, so you don't want to pray in front of the Imam. So in our madhab, that's a condition that we do not pray in front of the Imam. And then we talked about the scenario of praying in which the Imam is inside the mosque, but there's overflow outside the mosque, and then there's gaps. And we learned that the magic number is 144 meters, that's the measurement of the gap between the last contiguous row, so the Imam and all of the rows behind him, that last row, the distance between that last row and the row that's outside can be no greater than 144 meters, which is quite some distance as a matter of fact, and that there can be no artificial obstructions between them, such as a door that's been closed or a wall or something like that, in which case it would break the jama'ah. In addition to that, the people that are outside have to also be aware of how the Imam is praying, and that could either be by hearing or seeing him, or hearing or seeing some type of tabligh of the prayer, whether a person doing the tabligh or it's the microphone or something like that. And then after that, we talked about travel and shortening the prayers. We introduced the lesson by looking at what the definition of travel is and how traveling is a state, and if it's mixed with the state of residency will always overtake. And I tried to give some examples so people are understanding what that means. And then we went through the 5 conditions for the shortening the prayers, that it's not a prayer, it's not shortening the prayers, is that the travel is not a travel of disobedience, that it's at least 81 kilometers, that you can only shorten the 4 rak'ah prayers, that the niyyah is when you start the opening Allahu Akbar to shorten the prayer, and lastly that you are not being led by someone who is praying the full prayer. And inshallah in the next class we will talk about combining and also therefore round out the discussion of traveling. So I'll see you in the next class. Bi-iznillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.